Public support for Israel in European countries has fallen to its lowest level on record. That's according to a new YouGov poll. When asked about Israel's actions in Gaza, more than half of all those surveyed said they were not justified, with less than a quarter believing Israel was in the right. And regarding who they sided with, more than double those surveyed in the UK and Spain said they sympathized more with Palestinians than Israelis. Now, last month, the UK, Canada, and France released a joint statement condemning the starvation of Palestinians in Gaza under a 3-month blockade on international aid. They also vowed concrete action if Israel didn't reverse course. The UK followed it by summoning the Israeli ambassador and suspending free trade talks. In a week's time from now, France will co-chair a UN conference with Saudi Arabia calling for recognition of a Palestinian state, which could grant the Palestinians greater legitimacy at the UN and the ability to take Israel to international court on their own behalf. France's President Emmanuel Macron has reportedly also been lobbying other countries to step up and recognize Palestine, calling it a moral duty and a political necessity.
If we abandon Gaza, if we consider there is a free path for Israel, even if we do condemn the terrorist attacks, we kill our own credibility in the rest of the world. And this is why we do reject double standard, and this is why I think it's very important in our current environment to be consistent and to follow our principles, our rules, and to consider that what is at stake is clearly the global order, and what is at stake is our credibility to protect this global order.
Now, all of this has had little impact on the Netanyahu government, which continues to expand its military occupation of Gaza, displacing the majority of its population and depriving them of aid. Netanyahu himself struck back angrily at Macron, saying that Israel will not stop and will not surrender. But is rising diplomatic pressure on Israel changing how Israelis themselves see the ongoing genocide in Gaza? To tell us more, we're joined now by Israeli academic and philosopher Anat Matar. Anat, thank you so much for being with us.
Yes, I think, but not for the whole population. I mean, we've seen recently, it started a while after Israel resumed its war, or whatever, it's genocide, actually, it's not a war, in March 18th. But it took some time until that sank. And then liberal intellectuals, people who were protesting against Netanyahu throughout the last years, realized that I think the West started to be annoyed. And I think they somehow maneuvered their way out of the indifferent or whatever position that they held before. It could have been indifferent, it could have been supportive of the war, and we're talking about different studies. It's a very, very long period that we're talking about. So what was true for October, November, December 23 was no longer true for some of those people at the end of 24, say. But since March, and especially since we've heard exactly what you said, I mean, this uproar by the allies, I mean, people, they think themselves as part of, I mean, these intellectuals, they see themselves as part of the intellectual or liberal left or the West. And now I think they're finding their way alongside that. So you see much more protests against the war. They still call it a war, by the way. So much more protests, even in my university and other universities. Somehow things were shaken up. And we've been protesting since, I think, October. And only very recently other people joined, which I found really, it's good that it happened. It's not good that it happened so late, but it's good that it's happening.
I want to dig a little more into this because when you listen to the statements coming from Israeli officials, whether the Netanyahu government or whether at the United Nations, you get this recurring theme that the entire world is against Israel unfairly, the United Nations itself is against Israel, European leaders are targeting Israel unfairly, that there is this double standard that Israel is being held to internationally. Do you think Israelis themselves, when they hear this criticism coming from overseas, are they following this line that their government is holding, or do they believe this criticism to be legitimate?
Again, I think that the Israeli population is split, almost half and half if you ignore the my margin, which is not part of any half. But let's forget about that. So the Jewish majority, I think, is divided more or less in two halves. And one half will go after Netanyahu, whatever he says. And they're still supporting of whatever remains of that war, and they even don't really care, even if they say that they do, about the hostages. They're saying, yeah, we want them free, but not at the expense of the holy war. So yeah, these people will buy whatever slogan. And for them, Israel is the eternal victim, and that's it. And nothing will change that. The other population is the one, I mean, in degradations, but I think that the other population starts realizing that maybe in this case we are not the sole victim.
Last month, when Israel began allowing a trickle of aid into Gaza under the controversial Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, Netanyahu had to justify it to his own public, saying that this is going to shield Israel from pressure that it was under from its allies and allow it to continue the war. What kind of pressure do you think Israel is feeling in real terms from its allies right now?
I really don't think it's feeling any pressure, I must say. I don't buy this. Because there is no pressure. When you look at the ground, Israel has a total impunity. And we've seen that all along. And we've seen that since October 23, of course. But we also have seen this after March. I mean, when Israel really explicitly breached the agreement it was signed on. So, I mean, it cannot be denied. And still they are accusing anyone else who doesn't agree with them. And no, and I don't see any uproar, not in England, not in yes, we've seen Macron, and we've seen Starmer, and we've seen Lamy in England, and and we've seen in Canada and Norway, in other places. But where are the real sanctions? Where is something that goes beyond words? So they're contemplating of putting aside an agreement, and they're contemplating some symbolic steps, but I don't see the real payment.
Now, many
it is my own conviction that until a real payment will come, nothing will happen.
Now, you mentioned sanctions there. You have been one of those voices at the forefront of calling for sanctions against Israel. Why do you hold this position?
Because I don't think anything else will change the situation here. I really don't think anything else. I'm not sure this will help, by the way, because of course there may be the knee-jerk reaction that they sanction us, we hate them even more, and they're anti-Semite and whatever. So it may be the case, but any other option was already tried.
No.
What? Reproaches, articles in the papers, expositions in the New York Times, new discoveries in the Guardian, whatever. I mean, but nothing really changed.
You talked before about that sliver that you consider yourself a part of in Israeli society. What does it mean for someone like you to say something like this publicly in Israel, describing the public mood that you are saying, describing these two groups that are, they're both essentially against the war, but on different levels. What does it mean for somebody to call for sanctions against their own country, given this climate?
Yeah. Well, it's not easy, but I've been used to it for years. So just that the last couple of years were particularly heavy, and they were heavy, they are heavy. And still, we have hostages in both sides. and prisoners in both sides, in terrible conditions in both sides. And I care about both sides. And I've been involved for years in committees for the Palestinian prisoners, and I know what the situation in prison, in the Israeli prison is. So, I worry. It's not an easy period for me to live in Israel or anywhere, because I don't think I would change anything if I was abroad. But I have my circle of friends and comrades, and we've been protesting together from, very early on. We've known each other for many years. That helps. That helps.
Mm. And I mean, what do you take hope in, and where do you find strength to continue carving this very lonely path that you're on?
Well, I don't see any hope at the moment. I hope I'm mistaken about hope, but the strength, well, I've got it, and I think many because of my experience, many because of the so many years that I've been active. It gives you some energy to keep going. And as I said, I mean, there is this cluster of friends and comrades that we hold each other together.
Now, today, there was this explosive story that we saw about the Israeli government all but confirming that it has been arming gangs inside of Gaza, affiliated some of its members with ISIS. What do you make of this story?
I'm sure it's true. I'm sure it's true because, first of all, not because of Lieberman or other people. I don't buy what they're saying, but it was covered in Haaretz, which is a reliable source, and I know that when they say they have reliable sources, then they do. But I also remember it from months ago. I remember people I've been in touch with in Gaza directly, telling me that that Israel disrupts the ordinary the functioning of the aid delivery, and then that it supports the gangs. And that was months ago. I can't recall now, but it was a month ago, and it came from many people. Just I know or friends know. So it was on the background already then. But then now you have names, you have faces, you have pictures, you have TikToks, and yeah, I'm sure this is true. And it's actually very typical when you think about Israel's behavior all along. Why not? It's so obvious that this would be the road.
It does betray a kind of cynical thinking when it comes to the way that the government chooses to pursue military. It's the way that it chooses allies in a place like Gaza, the way that it would arm one faction to go after another. It is quite a far cry from the refrain that you hear from a lot of Israeli spokespeople about the IDF being the most moral army in the world and things of that nature. I mean, how do you think the Israeli public, the ones that you say are following Netanyahu blindly wherever he goes, how do they justify for themselves some of these tactics that might be difficult to hear about?
Well, I don't know about them, really, because I cannot fathom what the supporter of Netanyahu really thinks. Because we know Netanyahu. They may say that, yes, we're against Hamas, and anything that can bring down Hamas is in our side. But this is what they said, when they supported Hamas years ago. So, this is what I'm saying, that this is not the first time. It's not a surprise that Israel behaves like that. So if they feel okay with all of Israel's history, then they would feel okay now. If they don't, then okay, they will be critical. And I'm sure we will hear from that liberal part that I was mentioning in the beginning. I'm sure that we will hear critical voices. Ex-generals and all those people who just came to realize that the war is no longer profitable or something. They will criticize. I'm sure they will.
And finally, Anat, many Israeli voices that we have spoken to have said that the only pressure that only the pressure from the United States can have any influence on what Israel does and doesn't do. And we saw the U.S.'s position quite clearly again yesterday at the UN when they vetoed a call for a ceasefire that all the other members on the Security Council supported. Without the U.S. changing its position, if that doesn't happen on the horizon, what do you think the international community can do? Is there anything that they can do?
I'm sure they can do a lot if they detach themselves from mommy, from the U.S. I mean, Europe is quite powerful. I mean, if they gather together and add this to the United Kingdom as well, this is a strong power. And actually, when Trump announced his tariffs, then you saw them, uniting and talking against it, and at least giving a sort of image of firm position. And then he retracted a little bit. So they can do this in relation to Gaza. They simply don't.